Okay, well, why don't we just
Yeah, we'll go right into it.
so I'm going to get myself in trouble on this one, probably just by sheer dint of the fact that I even own this book, which I can say I haven't read a single page of. But
I did read that once. I did read that.
Eh?
I want to go downstairs and I want to read The Female Eunuch. I think I probably
I really want to get that, actually. I really want to get that. I've wanted to read that one for years. It's weird. I actually have almost as many books by Norman Mailer on my shelf as any other writer. Like McLuhan, it's all M people. McLuhan and Greil Marcus would be the only two people who are probably ahead of it. But I mean, it's partly because of when I started buying used books in the 80s. And you would just find all these books for really cheap. So I got on this kick, oh, there's another Norman Mailer book, I better own it. But I literally think of the maybe 13 Norman Mailer books on my shelf, I probably actually, in fact, read 2, maybe 3. And I mean, I've got some of them are interview books and stuff, so I've gone through those. But he's a writer to me that's maybe more interesting than, just for a lot of other reasons, than his actual writing. But we'll get into that. So obviously, we're talking about Norman Mailer. The movie we're going to discuss now is called Town Bloody Hall. I didn't even know it existed. I bought the Criterion subscription recently, and I was just flipping through it, and through one, a recommended search, for some reason, this Town Bloody Hall came up, and I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I've heard about this event before, where it's basically Norman Mailer kind of facing off against some prominent feminist from the time, 1971. And then when I saw that it was D.A. Pennebaker on the credits, I'm like, holy cow, this is like, how did I never hear of this? So correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the movie is Pennebaker shot all this footage. Nothing happened with it, and I don't know why. I don't know what the blank is there. And then this other person, Chris Hegedus, not Chris Hedges, but Chris Hegedus, I don't know anything about him.
I think it's a she, right?
Yes, it's
is it a she? Sorry, okay, I didn't even know
and
that.
She turned out she's has been his partner for a long time.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I think they did The War Room together and other films.
So do you have any reason then why it waited and why it was left until, because I think it came out in 2000, was it 2014?
No, I think 1979.
79.
Oh, it did?
79, but even there, that's still.
Then why? Well, then why are all these reviews I was looking at from like 20? Was it re-released or something, or maybe available?
Probably
on DVD?
The Criterion disc. It's probably a film that
maybe that's what it is.
Had such a limited release in '79, but it was. Maybe it played festivals.
Maybe on the 50th anniversary of the event itself too.
So did both of you know about this movie?
No, until you told me, and I'm like you. How did I not know about this film? Like it's such an amazing document of a moment. And until you mentioned, I was so glad you did. Glad that you stumbled over it, because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah. And I'll just say one quick comment.
Go ahead.
Okay, one quick comment at the start, then take over, Stephen. But and this is an obvious thing to say in this room particularly, but one of the things that amazed me most about it, and I flipped through it again a little bit tonight, I didn't have time to watch the whole thing again, was just how much, like, so many scenes of it reminded me of Eat the Document, and to a lesser extent, Don't Look Back. Like, it's definitely got the Pennebaker stamp on it. Like, some of the scenes of the crowds, it's like, man, I feel like this is the real follow-up to Eat the Document. And, you can say that for a number of reasons, too. So, anyway, dive in, Stephen.
I just as a starter, I had a quick question, but it's been answered, which was, okay, I thought you guys must be your favorite movies. Why did they pick this movie? Because I never heard of it, so I assumed you guys had it. No. Now I find out you
I stumbled on it 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I stumbled on it. I literally did not know a thing about it.
So we all learned.
So I loved it. What did you guys think of it? Like, I totally loved it. I would watch it again for sure.
I liked it a lot. For me, it's using Letterboxd. It was another thing. If I were to give this a rating, to me, it's a 7.5. Would I give it a 3.5 or a 4? A 4 sort of indicates a film that one day I might be in a mood where it's one of my favorite films ever. I don't think it's going to be that, but I think it's an amazing document of a moment. And one thing that I really loved about it that I'll get more when we get more into specifics, but I definitely liked it a lot.
Stephen, what do you think of it?
You haven't picked a rating yet. to me, there's two things going on. One is I want to say the characters in the movie. I think in one of those recent interviews, or maybe it was a reunion, whichever it was that Criterion has on there, I think it was Germaine Greer said, look, everybody was performing that day, not just Jill Johnston, but we all were. And Susan Sontag and all the people in us, we were all putting on a performance. And that's fine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is a document specifically about feminism in 1971 and the discussions between these women and Mailer, because Mailer is obviously putting on a performance because his whole life was a performance. There's nothing in this that's different from others. And I have actually read a lot of his books, and he especially once he got into those, what do you call it, nonfiction novels, whatever he called them, he inserts himself into his stories, writes about himself in the third person, and it doesn't matter what the event is. It's Chicago 68, or it's whatever it is, the main character is Norman Mailer. So that one of his books that I really like is about the fight between Ali and George Foreman down in Africa. Damn if when you read his book, it's about Norman Mailer, to the extent that one day he gets up in the morning and goes out and does road work with Ali just so he could do it. I mean, I'm not, I don't know. I'm just saying Norman Mailer, that thing was made for Norman Mailer. The other women had to deal with that. And I liked in the reunion video from, I can't remember, a few years back, the women that went to that, they all agreed, thank God Norman isn't here, because he was still alive then, because they knew what was going to happen. So many women refused to be on the panel in the first place because they didn't want to. Basically, it was a promo for the prisoner of sex in the end, you know. Anyway, there's that angle. But I think to get back to the eat the document kind of thing, what I think about cinema verite, it changes over time. Around the time that this event happened in 72, 73, when I was a film major, I was fascinated by cinema verite. I wanted to make movies like that. And I was very naive about it. I thought, it's real. Give me shelter. There you go. You know, that kind of thing. I'm much more suspicious of it now. I'm still appreciating it and even loving it. So when I hear that there were 3.5 hours of footage, or however much it was, but it went on longer than 80 minutes, isn't it? I want to know what Chris Hegedus, what came out of it, because the one of the things about cinema verite, if we're being naive at least, is that this is how something really happened, no artifice. But of course, there is artifice because someone decided what to put in it, what to equate the camera, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to know what they left out. Maybe we did it, we leave out the exact same thing. But knowing that there's more, I just wonder what that more is. Maybe it was just boring, you know, and they'd said, we don't want this. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess this is cinema verite, but I'm such a Frederick Wiseman film. I still think of this as different than Frederick Wiseman, because clearly they did select stuff. I mean, even watching the speakers, there was one point where I said, well, something got cut there because, you know, they're saying you got your 10 minutes. Well, they don't speak for 10 minutes, right?
Pretty close, though, I think.
Maybe. You know, to do
Bill Johnstone didn't. She went over.
Yeah.
To do true cinema verite, you'd have to do the Andy Warhol thing, supposedly, where he'd turn the camera on and then just walk away, right? Short of that, even Frederick Wiseman obviously makes choices, right? So
that's a good point. Wiseman's movies really are different than the Maisleys or Pennebaker, in that, although maybe he has just skillful artifice, but what his movies are 3.5 hours long. You think he must have put everything in there.
He leaves in more.
Is
Gimme Shelter considered? I never thought of that as cinema verite. To me, that's a film where, you know, he's cutting between the concert and them in the studio. It seems very constructive to me.
Yes, I agree with you. But I think it's because they put it out there for us to see. The scenes with Jack watching the footage, they're like saying, look, we're making this movie. So in that sense, gave me shelter more than the other ones point to it. And part of why I would throw it in the genre is just because the filmmakers, you know,
Yeah, they made Salesman. They came out.
yeah, they made all those other ones, and so that may be why I go with that. But Pennebaker, you know, you mentioned Eat the Document. When I finally saw it, I was frustrated. I wanted to see Bob Dylan sing a song, you know, and another song, and another song. I didn't want to see things broken up into various pieces. I watched Festival a little bit ago, and it was the same thing. It was like, wow, look at all this. This is when Bob Dylan did the Win Electric. I wanted to see all this stuff. There's some wonderful acts there. Here's half a song by Joan Baez. Here's half a song by. Man, I hate it when that happens. They did. To give them credit, we did get all of Maggie's Farm, so that there was a moment when they realized what was historic.
I was raving to Scott about Festival a few months ago. The first time I saw it on Turner, and not even the famous people. There were some people in that I'd never heard of, like some of those just local singers at the beginning. I loved that stuff. I was surprised. Did you want to jump in, Scott? I had some other stuff, but if you want to.
No, go ahead. I'll happily respond to what you say. No,
okay, so when Stephen was talking about, you know, it's all about Norman Mailer, I think the women, even in 1971, they were kind of attacking him for that in a way. Like Germaine Greer was going on about the exalted place of the male artist. And a couple people sarcastically said stuff about him. Or somebody would say something, maybe it was Diana Trilling. Somebody said our great American novelist. Everybody laughed and he seemed embarrassed by it. You know, we can get to the speakers and the part about feminism at some point we'll want to. But what I loved about it was that, and you know, I guess because I went to, Stephen has a different experience of this, and Scott, you're slightly younger than I am. But I guess that moment, I go to university in '79. I regret that I wasn't more involved in campus life. And all those people, I just grew up in the shadow of all these people.
Yeah.
You know, not in the moment like Stephen. And you know, Mailer was still huge in '79. Susan Sontag was. Some of the others had already gone and drifted away. But what amazed me was when they turned to the audience and they take questions. Think of the people that step up and ask questions. You start with Betty Friedan. Like you've had these famous people already speak, and then who's got a question? Oh, Betty Friedan, Susan Sontag, Cynthia Ozak, who I knew. I've never read her, but I knew the name. And it ended with, and he kind of got really taken down, Anatole Broyard, I think his name is.
Yeah, yeah.
And I read on the recommendation of Cale, I read a book, a memoir by him.
I've read that actually.
Yeah, Kafka Was All the Rage.
Yeah.
Just all these people. Like I was just astounded when Susan Sontag stepped up to the microphone to speak, and I could see Nat Hintoff in the front row.
Yeah, I noticed
and,
that.
And you know, other people just like that moment does not exist anymore, or else I'm so out of it. It goes on, but it goes on at a different level. And that's one of the reasons I love that film, Best of Enemies, so much. And you know, just forget about, you know, the William F. Buckley Gorbedell film. Just that moment that a major network would be having these two guys on as their commentators, you know, and it would be such a big deal. That moment, just, and it's nostalgia speaking, sorry, Stephen, but nostalgia for a moment I didn't even live through. That moment seems long gone to me.
No, I agree. That is probably, I think you've pinpointed what is my main attraction to the movie for sure. Like I do, and I admit it, it's kind of a romanticization in some ways, but I love the era or the idea. And it did seem to coalesce around television to some degree too. Like there's a great thing on YouTube you can watch, and it wasn't a contentious thing or controversial, but there's like a show, I can't remember what show it is. It might be a Canadian show, CBC, where it's Norman Mailer debating McLuhan, and they're talking for like 40 minutes. And it's just an unbelievably, for me, interesting discussion. Like they're just going so in depth, and they go over my head in a few areas too, but it's just so fascinating. And this is like the sort of the other side of that. It's more in but I love the brawls. I'll admit, I love the performance aspect of it.
Oh, it's totally a performance, but I agree.
Oh yeah.
Now, whether they're playing to the audience or to Pennebaker, I have to imagine Pennebaker did not play a huge role in their mind.
No, I had heard
film
that.
ever going to come out.
I had
You
heard
think
that.
by
I
that
think,
point?
well, no, I think I read that he actually, like, his access was fairly limited. Like, he didn't want to use handheld, but they had to use handheld because the hall wouldn't let them set up
Okay.
cameras on tripods or something like that. I read something odd about that. So it was, I don't think he was a big player, like, in the
No.
making of the movie.
I think they're all playing to each other. Like,
Yeah,
they're all
yeah.
they're all playing to Mailer. They're playing all Susan Sontag's here, and they're the performances for each other more than anybody, I think.
And the thing on the performance side of it, like, I would just openly admit, like, this is a movie, like, honestly, I just found myself like almost in uproarious laughter, like on many occasions. I just found it really funny. I mean, that Jill Johnston thing is maybe the most obviously
she is something
thing,
else.
but I just thought, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was hilarious. And I also thought it was ridiculous. Mailer was kind of right in a way, like, you know, stop playing these silly games.
But he comes off as so humorless during that. And he comes off as like,
oh yeah, no, he
arrogant and, you know,
he's beat at his own game. It's like, how can he, this guy who's made a whole career of these ridiculous performance things, and you think of things like the White Negro and all this stuff, like, how can this guy? But I mean, it showed like what his that was his discomfort. I mean, I think he just found it very uncomfortable. But even Diana Trilling, like, it's a bit of a generational thing too, right? You see a little bit of her during that, and it's kind of like, what are you doing? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, you know, it's kind of that whole literary world versus this new performance world. And I didn't know a damn thing about Jill Johnston before this movie. And I don't know if her writing is great or anything like that, but I actually thought, but my question about her though is, what happened to her? Like, did she just leave after that? Like, you don't see her again.
Well, you see her go off stage left and she never comes back.
Okay.
She shows up in the reunion video.
Okay.
On Criterion. I forget when Lesbian Nation came out. I don't know that it had come out yet.
Early 7. I think after that.
She was married. I read a little bit. She was married in the early 60s.
She was a Village Voice person.
Yeah.
I have to assume Mailer had a bit of a relationship with her via The Voice, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know,
possibly, but I think he was long gone from The Voice by then.
Yeah, that's true.
I think he actually had a sort of a split up with Mailer made everything public, right? But I think in Advertisements for Myself, I think he actually documents his brawl with the Village Voice, which is quite a bit earlier than that, like more like early 60s, I think. So could be wrong, but.
I was going to say that I could hear, and I don't know whose voice I was. I kept thinking of Cale. I could hear her voice at certain parts in that film. Maybe Diane Trilling was the Cale, but Diane Trilling had a certain refinement about her. I don't think she's Cale there, but some of the things she was saying, I think she was the one that sort of sided with Mailer. Not totally. She comes down the middle, right? She says, here's what's good about your piece, and here's what's bad about your piece. Camille Paglia seems like someone who would have been right at home there.
I think she might have been at that event. I looked up her stuff afterwards. She doesn't specifically say she was there, but she alludes to that event a couple of times. And she loved the Germaine Greer book, The Female Eunuch. But I think, she's one of those feminists she lost favor with or whatever. That's a different.
But I think she would love. I think of her as being Jill Johnston. I think she would. I'll bet you she'd rave about Jill Johnston.
I would say both Jill Johnston and Norman Mailer, though. Like, I think she kind of worshipped Mailer again for his performance, the performative side of what he does or whatever. So
part of what we're doing here, though, because we're talking about the performative aspects, we're talking about kind of like, I liked her, I didn't like her, and if this person showed up, she might have liked them. Is that makes the point that what did we learn about feminism in 1971 from this movie? We had some very esteemed feminists get to say their 10 minutes worth, and it's hard to remember what they said, except for Jill Johnston, who her poem. And
I listened to it. I tried to get some. I was going to say that when Stephen was saying all about, we're all going to put on performance, etc., Mailer alludes to that himself too at one point, where he says, I can play the fool if you want me to.
Yeah.
Right. He says it very crudely. He says, my Jewish dick. And he says, but then you'll find out it's just a dildo. So he's basically addressing that too, in his inimitable way.
But also maybe to respond to you a little bit, Stephen, I think like there's different ways of sort of addressing that question. Like if you're thinking of if you're trying to address the question in terms of like, you know, what were the big issues of the day, and but that's one way to address it. But a different way to address it, and although this wasn't totally surprising, I still found it a bit eye-opening. One thing I really liked about the movie was the fact that every woman on that stage, and some who were asking the questions as well, they were at war with each other in many ways, right? And I found that very interesting and very enlightening. It's like, and I think that's where Mailer was wrong about them, and a few of them sort of tried to point that out. I think who's one of the ones in the audience? Who was the first one you mentioned, Phil?
The first speaker was Betty Friedan.
Betty Friedan. I think that was kind of her point. And I thought Mailer was sort of unfairly dismissive of her, actually. Like I think she actually had a pretty good point, because one of her points was that, like, we're not all like, yeah, we're all kind of contentious. We do see things differently. We're not one voice or whatever. And that seems like a kind of obvious point. But I think when you read about events like these before you see them and after the fact, you kind of get this thing that it's like Mailer versus the feminists. And
That's how
like,
it's officially.
and that's not fair, right? Like it's Mailer versus these 4 different women who have very different and in many ways opposing views on feminism. And I found the arguments in some ways between Diana Trilling and Germaine Greer quite,
I was going to say,
like, it doesn't even matter to me in
words,
some ways what the actual content is. The fact that they were having this like dialogue and openly disagreeing with each other, I think there's something that you can actually take away from a historical perspective, you know, just noting that or whatever. So
they have very sharp words at one point. I think that's probably partly generational too.
Yeah. No, I think it was very much.
I think in the interview with Greer, on again referring to Criterion from a few years back, she doesn't spend much time on Trilling, but you get the feeling she hates her guts. At least she hates her ideas, I should say. To get back to when I said what's missing, one of the things that's missing from the events is all the women who refuse to do it.
Yeah.
So that you've got the woman from now, God love her, but that's as mainstream as you can get. You've got Diane Trilling, different kind of mainstream, but she's an established critic.
Literary world, basically.
Now you've got Germaine Greer and Jill Johnston. That's the radicals for this event. And Jill Johnston apparently was having her people were said, don't do this, and when she walked off, that was a statement in itself. Germaine Greer is the only one left in. So I'm thinking, okay, so where are those people? Not just like a Gloria Steinem,
That's who I was just
sort of Nisbet, but like Shalamith Firestone never even comes up. And she was, when I was alive then, right? Discovering a lot of these people for the first time as an 18-year-old boy who said, oh, there's feminism. And Shalamith Firestone, she made a big impression on me. Kate Millett, she comes up because she read Mailer in Sexual.
That's what the piece is about, right?
You know, where was she? Well, it's not, I mean, Pennebaker didn't leave her out. The people who put the program together, they didn't leave her out. They didn't come because they didn't want a part of it, and more power to them. But you end up, and there's an interview, maybe it's in the reunion, the woman from Now, she says, you know, I'm looking around these people, all these fantastic literary people and stuff, and I don't know what I'm doing on here. And you notice I didn't hardly talk once my 10 minutes was over because she knew that she was the sort of the middle of the road. She wasn't ashamed of that or anything, but she's on that panel. And you know, there's no Kate Dillon on that panel.
The most obvious thing from today's perspective, obviously, is that everybody's white, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, was Angela Davis ever considered? Was she might have been in prison at the time? I don't know. Or who in Miss America? Who was the? Well, I guess Shirley Chisholm was a prominent African American. But I mean, there must have been prominent African American feminists at the time, right? Or even someone of color somehow. And it's
Well,
just
and I think
one white person after another.
And I think that was a bit of a bone of contention among. I haven't read a lot about it. I don't want to pretend I'm knowledgeable on this, but my understanding is that a lot of African American women were quite suspicious of the feminist movement for that reason. They didn't feel they had a place. They felt it was like these Ivy League educated women, which it mostly was, at least the ones that were in the forefront of it, right? So
even somebody in the audience, they got crap.
someone mentioned something
yeah,
like that, right?
a woman that was advocating for poverty.
Yeah.
Yes, that was unclear to me. I think there were. This is don't count. Trust me on this, but I think there were some. I don't know if you call them protests, but there was actions outside the place.
Yeah.
Surrounding poverty, like poor people, they weren't there. So yeah, black people weren't there. Latinx wasn't there. Nobody was there but white people, and that was accurate in many ways.
Yeah, reflective of the time.
Feminism of the time.
Yeah.
So
there was something Mailer said though that I found interesting. I think actually holds up pretty well, where he was talking about how the left wing had a certain comfort with right wing fascism because and I thought of Trump, but much worse is left wing because it's like, wow, this is coming from our own side. And I think of the message board and just how everyone on the left hates Biden and hates that's not quite the same thing, you know what I mean? But there's a certain comfort in having an enemy, right? And if the enemy comes from your side, I thought what he said and the way he said it made sense to me.
Yeah, and didn't he? So it wasn't his point about that too, partially that like if you have like a sort of a right wing fascism, it gives the left sort of a cause and a reason to sort of
exactly.
envision an end point or whatever, not an end point, but a way. Yeah, but when it is your own, I guess that's exactly what you said. But yeah. The thing I was thinking of it in regards to the movie in terms of the here and now, like. Can you have this kind of thing now? Like, it's almost a catch-22 question, if that's the way to put it. Like, is this all we have now, or do we have any of it now? Like, in terms of, like, you couldn't have this kind of a dialogue, I don't think, in a public setting between. Like, I was trying to think, well, who would be at a comparable event like this now? I don't think you could have it kind of between, like, say, the alt-right and the left, because they wouldn't let each other into the same room probably.
No, you couldn't, but that range on display there is not quite that.
No, that's true.
Because it's like the woman
that's
now
fair.
is
That's
here.
fair. Yeah, you didn't have
Jill
William
Johnson
Buckley. You
is
didn't have
there.
William Buckley at that event or something.
Exactly. And William Buckley would probably be relatively mild on the other side, but you've got this range on there's the middle and range on the other side.
I mean, I guess I was thinking, you remember that, controversy, air quotes, about a year ago about that Harper's letter thing and all these, many more, Greil Marcus, more leftist kind of intellectuals took a lot of flack for signing this letter about cancel culture or whatever. I don't think they called it cancel culture, but that's clearly what it was kind of about. That would be one sort of thing you could have an interesting town hall kind of debate where it would be mostly people on the left or center of the spectrum who maybe have some fierce disagreements. But would it be a public event and would people be as energized by it as it was then? I don't know. Like, it just was sort of stuff that was percolating in my head as I'm watching this. Like, what is the contemporary version of this? Maybe we don't need it because it's all over the internet anyway, and it's sort of irrelevant. Like in 1971, it would have been a pretty cool thing to have a ticket to an event like that because it'd be a once in a lifetime thing. Now maybe it's everywhere. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be my inclination, that the internet has it's everywhere.
Rendered it irrelevant.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if you could have this special, just put aside the pandemic, but if you would have this town hall that would attract.
But maybe what I'm leading to thinking though is that you get it all the time, but you don't sort of get it too. Like, you don't actually get people, like genuine intellectuals, kind of confronted. Like, I find when sometimes you watch CNN or even look at message boards, it's kind of like people do sort of still kind of stick to their own, and I'm trying to think of an example of like some intellectuals who kind of fight with each other. I don't really see them in the same room actually with a moderator getting them to
Yeah.
it out. I don't know.
What do you think, Stan?
Specific to that, not really. I'm always amazed at this guy, Max Boot. Does he turn up on any of your shows?
Yeah, I recognize the name.
Max Boot he's a Republican.
Oh yeah.
Oh, big forehead. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a regular on CNN.
Yeah, because they're not real Republicans, and they've ruined the party, and for all these good reasons. The kind of person I'd like to say, well, that's a Republican, I can almost say. The problem is, Max Boot and I went to college together.
Oh, really?
Oh.
He was a columnist for the campus newspaper, and his role is, his character he played is Boot. He wrote these scathing editorials about Berkeley, and there's plenty to write about. It's all got Berkeley, all you commies, blah blah. He would make me mad, which means he was good. So happened one day, turned up as an esteemed commentator, and why not? But to me, I think back to when he was a junior in college, and I'm just amazed at how far he's come. That's all. That's not really relevant to the.
It is too. So I thought of that all through. Every time they trotted out a Republican to go after Trump, part of me said, "Oh, great," and then part of me said, "Well, I remember this person 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Like I could never take John Kasich seriously because I just remember how rotten he used to be."
So I agree with you, but I did end up falling on the side of actually applauding those people, believe it or not, even though they were terrible in many ways in their past life. And the reason I applauded them is someone pointed out, I can't remember who it was on Facebook or something, that we can like dismiss these people as much as you want to say they were terrible for their past deeds, but most of those people, those intellectuals who went against Trump, they lost family members and friends over their stance. Like they took real personal risk to do that. And they probably are still hated by family members because they basically didn't take up the Trump cause, and they pretty much are traitors to the Republican cause. And on that point alone, it's like, yeah, I would at least applaud their bravery for continuing to do that. And many of them continued to do it through the whole thing. So I actually did end up having begrudging respect for some of those people. Maybe a little more than begrudging. It's like, yeah, I would never go near your policies. And I'm sure we'll end up seeing some of the worst of some of them through the Biden era, maybe as more thing, but it's like,
fair point.
You did, at least you stood your ground and you didn't get persuaded. And yeah, you no doubt lost a lot of friends for sure over that. I mean,
I think that's true.
Mailer for a second.
Yeah.
I had a thing about Mailer and I wanted to make sure I said.
Yeah.
More than once, he accused the person talking to him of misreading what he did. You read my book.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I was trying to say, you didn't understand. I said this, and you think that. He said that many times. Now, one time, okay, 2 times, okay, but if every time reads what you've
at
written,
a certain point,
and they don't get it, okay, I think he's a wonderful writer, but there's something wrong with his writing because he's writing to say a point and no one understands it.
Even the woman that was sort of his defender, he said Diane Trilling. It was always Diane totally misunderstands everything.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know what? Look in the mirror, buddy.
But he probably had a valid point. It's a point that novelists make all the time, right? That was my character speak.
That point was a good point, actually. Yeah.
But he's talking about his nonfiction work. Is it?
Oh, I know. He did. He said it 10 times.
You guys don't understand me because
the thing about Norman Mailer, the writing I have read, and it's all been more of the nonfiction, sort of the stuff that blends it. Armies of the Night I've read, and I think Advertisements for Myself I read quite a bit of, and the Chicago '68 one, I can't even remember what it's called. But
Armies of the Night.
And then a few other, I've read lots of essays and stuff by him. But the thing is, the way Mailer writes, it's like it kind of eludes like a simple understanding, and that's good and bad. I mean, he does, he delves deep into his mind to try and figure things out. But for him to sort of say you didn't understand, it's like, yeah, but I don't think while you were writing, you necessarily understood. Like you're like, I always like Kale's line about Norman Mailer. We always come back to Pauline Kael in these conversations, don't we? But her review, I think I don't think it's of one of his movies. I think it's of his Maryland book.
Yes, it
She's
is.
talking about the good and bad of Norman Mailer, which is, I think, is the only way you can ever write about Norman Mailer, is the good and the bad. And she actually has one line about when he's really on, and she says when he's really racing or something.
Yeah,
But I
you know
always
what?
like
You
I
know
like
what,
that
Phil?
word racing
Scott,
because he's running after something.
you're not
right?
quoting Pauline Kael, you're quoting Stanley Kaufman.
No, it's definitely Kael.
Okay, because Stanley
She
Kaufman
has a
said
line.
exactly
She has
the
a
same
line like
thing.
that.
Okay.
No, well,
Kaufman
I'm
said
pretty sure.
exactly the same.
We'll do a check out because
Fact
maybe it's
check.
true of both. But I'm
Point
pretty
counter
sure
point.
I always had a line in my mind from Kael which says when Mailer's really on, when he's really racing or something. And I just thought, but that's like points out the way he writes. Like it's not some solidified, fixed use. So it was kind of ridiculous for him to say you didn't understand what I'm saying, because I think, well, I don't know if you understood what you're saying, and that was part of the point of why you were writing it, because all his writing is about him exploring his own thoughts on stuff, and which is in some ways is why it's hard to read. I find, like, I found in the Armies of the Night, I got a little bit sick of the, like, he'd see some person and he'd go on a 5-page like thing about, you know, what he thought this person's motivation. Like it's like, my God, turn your brain off just for 2 minutes and just describe what you're seeing or something. So,
Well, he turned up in the Kael documentary, right? On TV being interviewed saying she didn't understand what he was. So I think you're right. He's got a real problem there. Nobody understands him.
I
think he was scared of Kael, I think, right?
I might have the anecdote wrong, but I think she said that once when they met, he picked her up and squeezed her hard.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah.
I think that's, I hate to say it again, but I think that was John Cassavetes.
He's not very tall, but Pauline Kael's like this big. And so even Norman Mailer can pick up Pauline Kael and start twirling around.
Well, he has a piece somewhere where he reviews Last Tango in Paris, and it's the perfect Norman Mailer type of movie. And I think at reading that, I remember thinking, wow, he was like really sort of struck by and possibly intimidated by Kael on that movie. But I have to go back to see what it was. So obviously he was well aware of her. Well, who wouldn't?
Oh, very much so. I still have to, I've got that, we got a couple minutes left. I've still haven't watched. I bought the Criterion reissue of his Criterion mini box set of his 2 or 3 films. Like,
yeah, I don't know if I can bring myself to watch those. Should I watch them?
Wild 90, and
watch the part when Rip Torn hits him with
I would like to see the Rip Torn thing.
Yeah,
I think I've seen the scene actually.
What was the other? There's Wild 90. There's the Maidenstone with Rip Torn, but there was one other one between.
Well, those are the only 2 I can
Maidstone, and then
Maidstone, yeah.
There's one with 3 words, and one of them starts with an A again.
Yeah, so I gotta watch those. I did watch. I watched. He's in Godard's King Lear, isn't he? Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh.
And then I also watched. Oh, the film adaptation. Did he direct it of Tough Guys Don't Dance? I can't even remember.
I don't think he may have, but I know there was a movie.
Yeah, it was with Ryan O'Neal of all people. Wow, that came out.
Is he the tough guy or the dancer?
That's hard to imagine.
I know. Talk about a mismatched pair, Ryan O'Neal and Norman Mailer.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm glad. Just summing up for myself, I'm really glad you stumbled over it and that I've seen it.
Yeah, I found it extremely enjoyable. I will watch it again.
Yeah.
Some of it I just found uproariously funny, to be honest with you, like just beyond what is being said.
Well, the Cynthia Ozak thing, the line she quotes, where he even admits, terrible lines and all.
Dipping his balls in ink or something like
that. This round to you, and everybody's just going nuts.
Yeah. He's like, I'm the first to admit that I've written some ridiculous sentences, and that that's one of them. So.
Okay, well, listen, guys, it's been great. We'll email a couple weeks or a week if you think of anything.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.